Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Holy Human podcast, a podcast devoted to those who live to bridge worlds. We dive into nuanced conversations about the full spectrum human experience. We explore the dance of polarity, the mystery of life, and God. This is a space where the masculine and the feminine, the mystical and the practical, the mind and the body, the holy and the human come together. My name is Felix Whitman. I'm your host, and I invite you to today's episode. Today I'm joined by Rowan Garlow. Rowan is specialized in trauma recovery work. She utilizes voice dialogue, also known as parts work, somatic experiencing with a lot of focus on the nervous system, inner child, and soul retrieval for stabilizing, healing, and integrating unresolved trauma and assisting others back into a greater sense of wholeness and resiliency within themselves. She works with treating the symptoms of biological, psychological, emotional, and spiritual disharmony caused by trauma and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. In today's conversation, we explore the fascinating and important topic of trauma recovery. We dive into the spiritual aspects of deep trauma work, as well as into some practical tips and advice, and of course, much more than that. All through the lens of compassion, patience, and wholeness. So without further ado, let's jump right into the episode. Hi, Rowan. Welcome to the Holy Human podcast. So, I want to invite you to just start speaking about what's on your heart in regards to your current business, as it really deeply aligns with this podcast, bridging the mystical and the practical. So my invitation for you is to just start somewhere and tell us about who you are and what your client work looks like.
Yeah, it's a big question, right? For anybody, I think, to really outline who you are and what is the work that we're doing. Um, so I also bridge the gap between the mystical and the practical elements of, I think, trauma recovery. So my work is mostly in trauma recovery. I use a number of different modalities to help people recover from trauma. One of which is somatic experiencing, which involves the nervous system. That's Peter Levine's work that I know you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Helping people to move out of these fight, flight, freeze, fawn states, recognizing them when they come up, why they come up, where it's held in the body, and just giving the right conditions for their system to follow these impulses that never got to complete and move through them. Voice dialogue is another piece of the work that I do, so it's parts work. A lot of people are probably familiar with internal family systems, which is
Yeah.
the sort of the mainstream, or I guess not mainstream, it's just more well known than voice dialogue. And voice dialogue is really defined, so it was created by Helen Sidger Stone, and it's really defined as a consciousness expansion process. So it's looking at and creating relationship with these opposite pairs of selves that we have that are, I would say, though I don't know if I could speak for voice dialogue necessarily, but many of which are created from trauma, and how we identify with certain parts of us that keep us safe and disown other parts of ourselves that we can't really stay in contact with and stay safe in our environment growing up. And that ends up creating a lot of disharmony as an adult because we've
Yeah.
got these things that helped us to survive, just like we think about the nervous system work, these mechanisms that helped us to survive, but then become the very thing that don't really allow us to expand past a certain point. We're sort of stuck developmentally, or we're stuck in this place of imbalance and we can't really thrive because it doesn't feel like we really have choice. We're kind of locked into this conditioning, or we're locked into this way of being that was based off of survival. And even if we're in an environment where we finally feel safe, or there is, let's say, safety, because the reality is that you're not picking up on, your system's not really realizing that you're actually safe.
Yeah.
Even if that's the case, the system hasn't really caught up with that yet. So, like the internal family system, these parts of self, the nervous system is still really living in the past and replaying these traumas and these situations and relationships and how we feel in our body, how we feel about life. And it takes, there's so many different tools out there, I think, for dismantling these things, looking at them, becoming aware of them, creating a capacity for choice that's beyond even just the duality of any two parts within us. Like, let's say like a people pleaser and a part that has a really strong boundaries and doesn't care about anybody else but us. You would see these as two kind of opposite impulses. And there's something that happens when we start to create relationship with these different parts. We go into them, understand what they are, come out of them, sort of disidentify with them. And there's a lot I could say about that, a lot, but I'll kind of continue to go along here. So, the parts work is a key piece, the somatic experiencing is a key piece, and the completion process, which was created by Teal Swan, and it's a process for taking triggers that come up, right? Like a trigger is really like a PTSD flashback in a way. It's an emotional flashback, a somatic flashback. Maybe there's image or sound or smell or different things connected to that. And we use that as like kind of a rope to go back in time and to discover the root of when was the first time that this experience was created, this imprint was created in the being. And we help to renegotiate those experiences, right? Which could involve the nervous system, could involve the parts, inner children, not being protected, not being heard, seen, validated, understood, being asked to grow up too quickly, or abuse. Like there's all kinds of things that could happen that would cause a trauma, which is just this great deal of distress without resolve. And so we go in to try and resolve these things and bring the adult self in. And there's a whole series of steps that happen in a purification process, bringing them to a safe space, a safe haven, and then a reintegration. But yeah, I would say that I also have a good amount of people who come to me and find me because there aren't, I think there's more maybe emerging, but there aren't a ton of people who are working in the fields of trauma recovery and also have a decent understanding of the workings of our spiritual world in terms of like the non-physical reality. And certainly I have so much more to learn about that, but I've had a lot of direct experiences in that world, through dreams, through things that are really don't feel like dreams at all, but feel like things I've really lived and experienced outside of the body, from the time I was super young. And so at the most base layer, that capacity gives me an ability to sort of tune into things that maybe would otherwise be missed. I'm not here like giving people psychic readings or anything like that, but just
Mm-hmm.
in terms of being able to tune into the energetic component of what a person is going through, all the way to the most sort of the higher levels of this, which is really experiences that if a person were to go into a mainstream traditional therapist who even specializes in trauma, would probably be put on psychiatric meds because they don't have the understanding of what this person's talking about, and it would be seen probably as uh, not stable in some way. And I'm not talking about psychotic episodes, I'm talking about people who are pretty lucid and coherent and actually quite grounded in reality, but are having experiences that can't be explained by traditional models that require somebody with kind of a mysticism, esoteric lens and capacity. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say, kind of in a nutshell.
Mm. Oh, so many beautiful aspects to your work, and very much aligning with mine as well. You know, the somatic aspect, the nervous system, the parts work. That's sort of the core essence of my work as well. And then bridging in the mystical as well, like the more esoteric and spiritual layers, and energetic and intuitive layers as well, and bringing them together. I find that is so important as we develop this, you know, like somatics is sort of a very new field emerging. And so, like blending spirituality with somatics, I find that is so important. There's this term like trauma informed now rising, which I find really important and really good. Like I'm super happy that it's becoming more mainstream now. And then there's another term that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, which is sort of spirit informed, you know, as like a complementary form, you know, practitioner that needs to be like all practitioners should be trauma informed. And I find that spirit informed could just be another thing that is super important as well, you know, just honoring the spiritual component of yeah, just our reality and weaving that into the work, you know, that there is sort of a higher force at work, name it God or whatever name you want to give it. But like weaving that into the work and having that as a foundation, as well as the like knowing what trauma does and the effects of trauma and how to work with it, so that you avoid re-traumatization. I think these are things that are sort of de being developed as we speak and as we are having this conversation. And yeah, just is there anything that you would like to share in regards to the term spirit informed or spirit led or however you wanna name that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a great awakening happening, and I know that there have been many different decades and eons or different parts of our evolution where it's like the awakening, right? The great awakening, and
Mm,
maybe these words it being used so much that for some people they might lose their actual substance. We really do go through these rises and falls as a collective, and not everybody's going to be on the same wave of those rising and falls. But I don't think it's any doubt that there's a huge opportunity if we're alive. It doesn't matter what time we're in. I do think that there's something really special about this particular time that we're in. But as long as we're alive, this is a real gift and an opportunity for all of us to really explore what that means. Like what is this experience that we're having? And it can be
mm,
pretty surreal because we're going, it's easy to get really locked in to the material world, to our day to day life, and almost forget what's really happening, the spirit that really is behind and within and around everything that's happening, including this moment, this conversation. And there's these moments that I think more of us are having more and more and more, where it's almost like we're being asked to remember full time, to really live in that remembrance of the spirit that, like I said, is within, around, and leading everything, this sort of grand tapestry. And I know that even Peter Levine talks about how eventually, I'm probably gonna, it's not, this is not gonna be an exact quote, probably a paraphrase, but at some point within trauma healing, it's always gonna lead you to the spirit, because there is no trauma healing without involving the spirit. Because if we talk about that distress without resolve, what we're describing are moments and points of disconnection
Yeah.
from ourselves. And that often begins with disconnection from our emotional experience, our body, our identity. But then where it leads us in this bigger way is like a disconnection from the spirit and the heart, and the heart of our spirit that lives, far beyond just this one lifetime that we're leading now. And I really believe that that's true. And there's many people who know that feel that. It's like just simply, it's going to show up different for all of us. What sparks that remembrance? It could be just observing a flower in a moment, and the awe, the wonder of,
Yeah.
what is this force that's animating this expression? How is it that we can become aware of ourselves, becoming aware, when we look into the eyes of a baby or an animal, or we sit and connect with another human being, and there's something so profound, unspeakable, that's almost hard to put into words, but we can feel that there's something greater happening. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. That's like a palpable transmission. Yeah, feeling spirit, feeling life, just penetrating everything. And I like how you brought this into like this conversation into sort of the bigger frame, the bigger picture, because that is sort of what we are waking up now in these times that we are in, where we remove ourselves, collectively speaking, from the full spectrum human experience more and more, like from life, with like the technology evolving. And so I think the work that both you and I are sort of doing is so important. Like really, for one, understanding the body, like the whole somatics, the nervous system work, and on the other hand, like the spiritual, the deeper component of why we are here. Like, zooming out and seeing what is this one human life, like where does it fit in, viewing it from a grander perspective. And so, yeah, I think it's just super important to spread this message, and to, yeah, first and foremost, for people to understand and reconnect to their body, because you're living every single day in your body. And this is something that I'm so passionate about. The nervous system knowledge, and also the trauma knowledge, but especially the knowledge about the nervous system and how our body works, shouldn't be, to me, it's not like the holy grail, or some kind of fancy stuff that is just hyping right now. I find this is like reading, like learning how to read or learning how to count. It's like it should be taught in school, in prison, everywhere, in elderly home care, all over the world. It should just be taught to everyone, so that we understand how to like like how our body functions, how to move through different states, and then we're sort of moving away from pathologizing our body, from making something wrong with our existence. And that is exactly what brings us closer to spirit, to God, that we understand we are inherently whole. We are children of God, and there's nothing wrong with us. We are just in this experience, learning, developing our consciousness. And I think the understanding the nervous system is one of the keys, one of the most important elements to really coming closer yeah, into wholeness.
Wow. Yeah, I really love that. And what you're saying about, it's sort of twofold, I think, because while like the keys of this wholeness are within us and can be found in our ability to connect with each other, I think the experience for so many of us is that we don't feel whole, right? Like it feels like
Right.
there's something wrong, it feels like there's something missing. And ultimately, we are whole, but we also are sort of not in these different ways. And that's where this deeper work comes in. But what your key point is, which is so important, is that there's nothing wrong with us for being this way.
Yeah.
This makes sense. It makes
Hmm.
sense if we take the context of what we were developed in, the level of consciousness that our society is at, which means the level of consciousness the average family system is at, and society at large. It's it's almost like, we have, let's say, a dog who's been abused in some way and it's biting people, and we're going, well, what is wrong with this dog? Well, no, the dog is doing exactly what it should do in a situation where it's been abused. It's trying to protect itself, or so it's like that piece, I think, helps. It's helped me, it's helped my clients to really understand and have compassion for ourselves, that whatever it is that we're moving through, that we're trying to integrate, have these experiences in the nervous system move through that didn't get to, or emotions that got trapped, we can be so hard on ourselves because we have this ridiculous expectation that we can go through the things that we've experienced and that we should somehow be having a different response than what's happening. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what creates so much suffering, is that we then turn on ourselves and like, shame ourselves for these things, because we know, I think deep down, that we're capable of so much more. We know that, like, this isn't really who I am. Shutting down or fawning or fighting or anxiety or depression or whatever's happening, it's like, I just know that this is not who I really am. And it's that gap between what we know we truly are and what it feels like we're sort of grappling with in the moment that can create that suffering. But really, through the compassion, which is, easier said than done, but the compassion that we have for ourselves, like, okay, how does this make sense that this is what's happening right now? Let's sort of see if we can shelf the expectation that it should be different, because the moment that we do that, we actually allow space for the experience that we're needing to truly be with and have. And sometimes those experiences are incredibly painful. I mean, I understand why we would spend lifetimes distracting ourselves or avoiding ourselves, but we're really only delaying sort of the inevitable, which is that thing is still going to be there. It's still calling us home. And we can see these painful triggers or, behaviors that we can't seem to break out of, when we turn towards them moment by moment, we see this as a really big opportunity to recognize, like, wow, okay, this is here for a reason, and the sooner that I turn towards it and allow myself to have this experience, it moves, it changes. I know what it feels like. This was just me yesterday. Okay, I know what it feels like to be in one of these processes and to be absolutely terrified that it's never going to end. That, oh God, not this again, right? How many times am I going to have to go back here? This layer again, this type of pain again? Because the reality is that it's not just like a one and done. Oh, I went there, I did the process, and now I'm finished. These are very layered experiences. What I want to draw everyone's attention to, if they've chosen to take this on, is that it does get better. In terms of your capacity to turn towards it sooner increases. You fight it maybe a little less. There's more information that's able to come up and integrate. You stay in it less. You recover faster. There's all these ways that it really does change. And so even though the experience can feel like, oh, this again, we just have to notice how it's not exactly the same. And it is getting better, though sometimes it may feel incremental or small. Sometimes there may be a big leap, and to pat ourselves on the back for having that kind of a win. But I know what that's like to go, oh my God, this is never going to end. But then you allow it, and we're purified really through the experience, because there are so many things within us as individuals that have been traveling through the lineages for thousands of years, for so long. There's a tremendous amount of energy behind that experience, that negative experience that we don't want to have. And there's so much that's really asking to die, to dissolve, and to be seen and heard and witnessed and understood. And when I say die, it's like the residue of that traumatic material, that imprint through that witnessing process, that ability to sort of be more unconditional with ourselves. It no longer needs to hold on to us in the moment that we are in now. And that's what we're really after, I think. A lot of us want to feel free. We want to feel free from the constraints of the experiences, the traumas, our lineages, so we can be here now and we can have things like joy and expression and peace. But that really comes from this ability to be more unconditional with ourselves. Sort of like, I was describing this, just one last thing I want to say here. I was describing this to a client of mine the other day. This person had come in and they're saying, like, I feel cut off from joy. And I don't really know what that means or how to get there. So then I'm kind of inquiring, okay, well, where are they now? Like, what's the base level that they sort of live in at the moment? Because we have to meet ourselves and others like where they are. And the experience was like intense levels of self-constraint, to the point of like deep freeze, not even breathing a certain way, not like making noise, like sort of staying invisible and hidden, because that's how they survived in their childhood, was by basically not existing in a way. And then when I start asking them about their relationship to anger, it's like, may seem like a strange question. They pretty much can't remember the last time that they were angry.
Wow.
And did not want to be angry, because the people that they grew up around were incredibly aggressive, volatile, abusive, angry people. So, right, that child made a decision very early on, I'm not going to be anything like those people. Well, what happens is if we think about joy, like these different emotional states or these different states of being kind of like a ladder, and joy is like maybe like it's kind of high up on the top of that ladder, and the state of suppression that this person was living in, kind of more of a freeze, is sort of at the bottom of that ladder. They had basically kicked out like three rungs on the centerpiece of that ladder, which was the fight response, the flight response, the ability to feel the life force energy sort of liberated within the body from the total shutdown, right? And it's not that they would stay there, but it's that when we're in such an extreme form of self censorship and constriction and denial, when that begins to thaw out, there's going to be all of these moments and all of this energy that never got to express that's probably very angry and probably wants to express the feeling of powerlessness to get that power back, but in a way that might not be acceptable to this person. So it's sort of like they would touch it and then they would go back down. Touch it, go back down. And so I'm like, we need to rehabilitate the ladder. We got to bring the steps that we decided long ago we couldn't have. We got to put those pieces back in the ladder, because if we're going to get to joy, we're going to have to get to probably anger first and
Mm-hmm.
all of these other socially unacceptable things. And so I think that's a very interesting example of what it really means, I think, to come into these like higher states of being. So that was a lot of information, but
Mm. So much, and yeah, so much resonant information where I would just scream, yeah, like, yes, Rowan, I love everything you said. Mm. For one, especially the part where you said you were talking about the your capacity to hold yourself in these uncomfortable states grows, and this is what changes. I made a post, I think, years ago about healing and like, will it ever end, like the journey of healing? And my answer was probably not, but your relationship to the healing changes. So you like the uncomfortability, like fear, sadness, anger, all of these emotions, because we are human, they won't ever go away, and we have so much to uncover. And the more you heal, the more stuff there, like, you'll discover to uproot as well, and to heal and to integrate and whatever. But the one thing that changes is like your relationship, like your journey becomes more of something that you somehow enjoy, even if it's not enjoyable, and your capacity changes. Like, you're able to be with them in a more easier way. So it's not like the rug is being pulled underneath your feet, if that makes sense. And then, oh man, you said so many beautiful things also about the like climbing the ladder. What's his name? Have you ever heard about the ladder of consciousness by Dr. Oh man, I forgot his name, but I'll link it in the show notes later on. On the bottom, according to his ladder, is shame. It's like the lowest vibrational emotion. And on the top is sort of like enlightenment or peace, and joy is very high up there. And then you have sort of neutrality in the middle. And in order to get to neutrality, you have to go from like shame to perhaps like guilt, and then anger, frustration. Those are higher vibrational emotions. Not to say that they are better, but just on the frequency spectrum. And so you have to climb that ladder. And I find this really, really interesting and super, super important. Something that I'm dealing with as well. Like allowing myself to feel this rage, because it's more empowering than shame, where you're just down below and you're living in apathy of like, does it even make sense? Like in dorsal vagal, in complete shutdown, collapse, and life doesn't make sense. You're just depressed. And so accessing that life force, that anger, brings you up. And one thing that has really, really helped me, I don't know, do you work with the window of tolerance from Daniel Siegel, Dr. Daniel Siegel? If you want to, we can dive into that because I think it's a very practical concept that really like I tell it to all of my clients and it's really like practical, helpful, and it's changed my way of relating to myself. I took away the idea that something is inherently wrong with me, and instead I can now gauge where I'm at with my nervous system activation. So if you would like to dive into that concept, that would be
Yeah, no,
amazing.
can you explain that because I'm familiar with the window of tolerance, but I don't know exactly what you're describing there.
Okay, so the window of tolerance, a beautiful concept by Dr. Daniel Siegel, is basically you imagine two like parallel lines, and so within those lines you have the optimal energy of arousal, like the optimal amount of arousal in your body in terms of like activation, in terms of like energy. So it's that sweet spot of not being too activated, like not having too much excitement, too much energy, and not being down below in sort of a depressed low energy state. So that would be called regulation. And so down below you have the dorsal vagal, what in polyvagal theory you call it dorsal vagal, the shutdown, the collapse. This is where apathy lives. It's like, does it even make sense? You know, you're having no energy, you're sort of dissociated out of your body. And then up there, like this is your regulated state, and up there you have the whole sympathetic range where hyperarousal lives, where fight and flight lives, where you're in do mode. You can either like run away or fight your problem. And so yeah, this is just such a beautiful concept to gauge where you're at. Are you like sort of in that sort of anxiety, high arousal, high activation state, or are you down below? And like the optimal would be sort of a sinus wave within the window of tolerance. It's like you're spiking a bit up. Perhaps you're leaving your window of tolerance for a bit into the sympathetic, and perhaps you're dropping down a bit into the collapse, into the low energy. But you're sort of oscillating between up and down, and sort of trauma happens when you're high up there, and you have no opportunity to discharge this mobilized survival energy. And if you're stuck there, then this is where trauma happens, and you drop down perhaps into like dorsal vagal, and you're completely like numb and shut down, and you don't know how to get out of there anymore.
Yeah, thank you for. I know now what, as you started to explain it, I was like, oh, okay, I know what he's talking about now. But I was like, I wasn't sure if this was something I had never heard of before. This, like, when you were describing the two parallel lines, I was like, ooh, what is this? And then I'm like, oh, I know what that is. Okay, okay. What it makes me think of is, and I wish I had the actual thing, I would be able to read it, but I'll just tell the story. It makes me think of this sort of sheet of paper that my first somatic experiencing practitioner ever gave me. And she, like, I remember coming in, like, physically in person to do a session with her. And this was during my SE training. We have to get so many sessions, and, also just like, I wanted to do this. And I
Mm,
was so used to, dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, that I had pretty much no like inhibitory skills. So, I mean, those are inhibitory, like, especially dialectical behavior therapy. It's like a lot of like learning inhibition and things like that. But it was so, I never had a practitioner who was holding that sort of like, okay, let's not re traumatize your system, because I was so used to going in and sort of like blah, like all this stuff just like coming out of me and like jumping right
yeah,
into this sympathetic, like overactivated state. And she was like, you know, okay for us to just like pause right here. And I remember feeling really pissed off at her because I was like, she's inhibiting me right now. She's like stopping me from, there's like too many constraints on what's going on, and she's asking me to stop and slow down and like pay attention to what's happening in my body. And if I do that, I'm going to suddenly have to access all this vulnerability that I have spent my lifetime avoiding through these mechanisms. And so, whatever. It was a really good experience working with her. But then she gave me this sheet of paper and she read it to me, and this speaks to what you were saying in the beginning around capacity and how our experience of these things fundamentally changes, right? Like we don't avoid the pain. We can avoid the suffering though, which is really an ignoring of the pain. The sadness, all these different experiences that we have, they're going to continue to happen. It's our capacity to be with those things that changes, and so our experience of it changes. And so this story is of an apprentice and a master, kind of old world words, I know, but this apprentice comes to his master, right? Like, it's so funny, but comes to his master and he's complaining about all these different things. And that's not to minimize also like the experiences that we may need to talk about. It's not necessarily complaining, but he's coming, he's like all ruffled up about these things. And his master says, I might even just use the word mentor because it just feels more palatable for me. It's like hard for me to say like master. But his mentor says, I want you to take a handful of salt and place it in a glass of water and then take a drink of that water. And so he does that and he takes a sip and he spits it out and he's like, this is disgusting, it's bitter. And he goes, okay, now I want you to take that same handful of salt and I want you to place it in a freshwater lake and then take a glass and take a drink. And he said, what does it taste like? It tastes fresh. And that is exactly what we are describing here. It's that the pain of life, or these salty, abrasive experiences, is no more, no less. Our experience changes when our capacity widens. So a lot of us have this window of tolerance that's quite small, like a cup, maybe even a teacup size. And so we're drowning in the experience of this salt. And over time, maybe that becomes a bowl, maybe that becomes like swimming pool sized and then lake sized. And really, it's like it's there, but we are so much, our capacity and our being is so expanded and so great that it doesn't really taste the same. The experience is not the same. And that really stuck with me a lot. And there's, just to name one other, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, just to name one other thing that you mentioned about, to give the opposite experience, to give the opposite example from what I was describing about the ladder rung and the joy and this, starting at a really shut down place, and this person who had cut out the middle layer of the ladder, which was anger. To the opposite, when we've been living in, which is I think what you were starting to really talk about, like when we've been living in, let's say, anger as a protective mechanism, or the fight response as a protective mechanism, which has been more my experience, it's been a way of staying seemingly more empowered. Because like you said, shame, grief, those are things that are, powerlessness, despair, those are things that are pretty hard to stay in. And so, we may numb out from those things and be shut down, but numbed out from them, or we may pop up into fighting and anger. But we do these things because it's really hard to actually stay there unless we've been shown like how to do that, or we have a guide or somebody there with us to kind of help us to traverse those places without re-traumatizing ourselves. So it's definitely more empowering, or it feels more empowering, or it's felt more empowering for me to stay in the fight response, or in the anger, or in the abrasiveness and the hardness, because not only was that how I survived, but I certainly didn't want to spend time actually feeling the powerlessness that was underneath anger. And so it's sort of like, if we bring back that ladder situation, I'm not going to be able to get to those higher states of being, not permanently, right? But like in moments, to even access that within my being, if I can't drop to the lower parts of the ladder, which are the despair and the powerlessness that's really underneath all of that, and the fear, really fear actually being at the core of all of that. And that, in doing that, that's allowed me to then be able to climb the ladder again in moments. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love it. I really love this kind of analogy. And I would love to dive into like practical ways of how you can start holding yourself more gracefully in those very like helpless, hopeless, despair like emotions. Because I find that is really, really difficult. And so one of my main concerns in my work is like resource oriented. I work very resource oriented, which means like it doesn't make any sense for someone who doesn't have a foundation of feeling some kind of internal safety within in their body to drop in and do any cathartic releases or feel these like extremely harsh emotions or heavy emotions, because it's just gonna blow their capacity and blow them out of their window of tolerance again. So yeah, I would love to hear your sort of take on, for me, it's like the principle of titration by Peter Levine, like step by step by step, going very small instead of like these big steps and trying to like feel this great, I don't know, those great emotional releases. And to really tighten this question, what would be like practical steps to sort of like develop resources to hold yourself in a more, let's call it, graceful manner?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you named what you just named, because that nuance is so, so important, right? We can talk about feeling our feelings, but what does that really mean to do that in a way that doesn't re traumatize us?
Exactly.
Because you drop yourself down into the gates of your internal hellscape, and without stabilization, which is what you're talking about, we're not
Yeah.
really doing good trauma recovery. And so the stabilization, there's sort of three phases of therapeutics, and then I'll answer your question about, practically speaking, how do we stabilize so that we can take these things in little bite-sized chunks without traumatizing ourselves. It's stabilization, trauma work, integration. It's not a perfectly linear path where we go, okay, now I have my foundation and now I can do trauma recovery and now I will integrate. Sometimes we'll stabilize a little bit, we'll jump into the trauma recovery piece, we might go back to stabilization. We might do stabilization, little jump, little integration, back to trauma recovery, a little bit back to, so we're weaving this thing, but every system is so different. I think some of the pieces that help, and I would love for you to name some as well, around resourcing what you're describing, is the senses, but
Yeah.
not just the internal senses, right? Like connecting to the environment. Now, hopefully, you're doing this stabilization in a place that feels relatively safe to you, because that's really important. So, if you need to get to a little patch of grass in nature, you need to get into your car, or there's a place where you feel more contained or connected to a place of safety that's important. And then we can start to tap into our senses. So for a lot of people, going into the body experience of something can be really overwhelming because we're not used to really being connected to that depth of bodily experience. So we want to pick things, there's kind of a spectrum here. We want to pick things that either feel less distressing, because sometimes we can't access anything that feels neutral or positive. We're just looking for like slightly less bad than the worst thing that's happening in the body. Best case scenario, neutral or positive. So there might be I might involve the senses. Let's literally turn the head and look around, because when we actually, not just the eyes, but when we physically turn our head and look around the space and orient, that's communicating to the brain that we know where we are. We're scanning the environment and the horizon for any threats, and we're seeing that in this moment, the tiger is not coming to get us. That's one thing, right? Colors. So I'll have people name 5 colors that they can see, or 5 things that catch their eye. This is really accessing a different part of the brain, and in doing so, again, kind of starts communicating a level of safety to the body. Because if I have time to really consider the shades of green on that leaf, there must be something safe about what's happening right now. We can't even think about something like that if we're trying to run for our lives or survive something. Sounds, right? We might be tapping into what sounds can I hear in my environment right now? Can I name those sounds and just really tune into them? It might be a taste of something, like a sip of water or a sip of tea, taste of like even salt, like just, a piece of sugar in your mouth, like something that's going to bring you into the palate. Smell, can I smell something like a candle or, anything that I would enjoy, bringing that in. And then in the bodyscape, we could look for something that doesn't have as much charge. So let's say that like the throat or the heart or the gut is like, generally when we're experiencing like somatic physical activation, we tend to feel it in like the trunk of our body, unless there's like an injury or something that is related to this, right? Maybe it would be the shoulder or something like that. But we're wanting to find anything in the body that has less of a charge. So maybe that's like a fingernail, a toe, your legs. Sometimes people will say like the whole lower half of my body doesn't really feel that much of a charge. And so that begins that process of like pendulation, which is like movement between. And that movement is really important, that there's something else happening right now besides this very intense experience that we're having. Because that we'll go, oh my God, this thing's happening. I'm stuck here. Oh my God, how long is it going to last? Well, if we remind the body and we go, oh wait, but there's nothing happening in my toe, or it's kind of pleasant for me to look at that tree out there. Now we can start this process of movement between that thing that's less bad, maybe neutral, maybe positive, and the thing that's really causing distress. And what most people notice in that process is a deeper breath, maybe a yawn, a feeling of more space, maybe that tension or that thing is there, but it's not as intense. And then we can go back, right, to that feeling now that there's more capacity, and we continue that process until this discharge happens. I do want to say, before I turn this back over to you, that I recognize how challenging this can be. So please, please, please do not expect yourself, if you're hearing this, to do that perfectly. Because as somebody who has been doing this work for the somatic piece for 3+ years now, I know these things. Accessing those tools when your amygdala is firing off at you is a challenge. It's not impossible, but it's a challenge, and it's something that has to be slowly built in layers and pieces. If all you get is the awareness that you can't access that tool in this moment, great. You're doing great. Because next time, maybe you will get access to just wiggling your toes, just picking up your toes and kind of like grabbing onto the carpet, or pretending that you're scooping up the carpet with your toes. Maybe you will get access to rubbing your arm, right? And just noticing that there's this gentle stroke coming in. Maybe all you'll get access to is like a hand over your heart and a hand over your belly as a way of supporting the front body, or placing your hands over your head to just contain, maybe your mind is just going in all different directions and you've got your hands on your head. One simple thing, if you did that, amazing. Just keep going.
Wow. It's almost like mic drop, Rowan. Everything you said, so important, so essential, so distilled down, and also so aligned with my work. I love everything you said, especially the last part, like really having compassion. I catch myself often, very often. I know all of these things very well, but it's so hard sometimes, when you're in that situation and you are triggered. And like for me, it's the freeze. I often am greeted by immense amounts of freeze, like where I know I have to do a certain thing and I actually know what I have to do and how, but I just can't get myself to do it. And then not looping in the guilt, like in the internal shaming, that's so important. And like you said, just turning your attention towards something else. It's that turning towards the resource which changes everything. Even if it's just the realization, the acknowledgement of, oh, I'm pretty dysregulated right now and I can't do anything about it. But that's also so huge. And then everything that you said about in the beginning, you talked about a lot about the like external resources, which I find super important as well, just to highlight that. Like if you are someone like myself, and perhaps you are as well, Rowan, who has like a huge, strong interoception, like the tendency to observe everything and like analyze everything that's happening internally. I get triggered and I'm like, okay, what is this kind of emotion and how can I digest it? What can I do? And it's like this internal talk is just so overwhelming. And the most beneficial thing in terms of like moving towards regulation for me has actually been to turn my attention towards the external reality, like everything you said, Rowan. Like one of the greatest resources is just looking at nature, even if that's you're at work and you're stressed, and I feel the anxiety rising, and I have that one moment, and I can just look outside the window for like 10 seconds and observe how the lightning, the different shades on perhaps a tree, that changes so much in your brain because you're actually showing your nervous system that right now there's no tiger trying to eat you, but you're actually safe. And this is what we sort of have to understand that, yeah, talking to your nervous system and your body can be a resource and helpful, but the nervous system doesn't really understand language as much as it does the like through your visual or your other senses. That's how you communicate with your nervous system in an appropriate and effective way. And yeah, there's so much that you said which I just find so important.
And with, let's say, the tree example, right? If you're in your office or you're inside and you see that, I like to imagine sort of bringing the tree inside.
Mm.
So it's like, maybe on my inhale or just within my intention, kind of calling that closer to me. So it's like right next to me. And then that there's something about that that feels like a pillar, right? It's got its roots, it's grounded, something we can kind of hold on to. And there's something about that, or animals, something soft, even just the idea of your favorite creature being beside you, looking 360 degrees all the way around you so that you can feel what's here, because this being has your back. Maybe you've got one stationed in every direction. I like to use like a wolf. So I'll have my wolf stationed all the way around me, and it's got the eyes for me so that I can focus on maybe the tree or the sounds. So there's so many different ways that we can do this. Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. I can feel the wolves actually in you. And that brings us to a level of creativity, like using our imagination. I love that. So got such an empowering texture to it, I find. Mm,
Oh yeah, it's unlimited.
yeah, totally. Okay, so we've touched on in the beginning on a bit of the spiritual aspects, the mystic aspects, and then went into like trauma integration and the nervous system. And so my invitation to you, Rowan, is just to feel into if there's anything that you would like to share right now, anything that lies on your heart, perhaps something else that we want to dive into, or some final words, whatever you're feeling.
I think if I had like like a final message or something like that, it would be just for us all, as hard as I know this is, to really, really be patient with ourselves and to be really gentle with ourselves. There's just no way that we can get through, move through, transform, like all that we're being asked to transform, without that patience and that gentleness. It's, you're not behind, you're not too late to the party. You don't need to hurry up and catch up and learn all the information and cram it all into your brain. You're okay where you are. You're exactly where you are, and that is more than okay. We're just taking it, all of us, one moment at a time. We've got to remember that. It's so easy to look outside and go, oh, that person has, figured this out and they're so much further along than me. You don't know that. You don't know that. Intellectual information is one thing, but really embodying this stuff is a whole other ballgame. You're not behind. The fact that you even care to listen to this, to attempt what we are talking about, if that's all you did your whole life was just attempt to embody this, you are fucking doing it. That is amazing. And my hat goes off to you. Really, like, just take that in. My hat goes off to you out there if you are just even trying. I see the effort does not go unnoticed. And thank you for just being here, for trying. And give yourself a couple days or just time to like not consume more information, but to really be, to know that you have more than enough, and just to take one little morsel that you got from this and work with that one little morsel and nothing more and nothing less.
Wow. Yeah. Let that sink in. That's the essence, Rowan. We are whole. Beautiful. On that note, I'll leave all the links that how people can find you down in the show notes. If someone would like to connect with you, what would be the best way?
So, well, either Instagram, which is at Rowan, Rowan, Garlow, Garlow, which is my name, you'll see, or rowangarlow.com. It's very simple. Those are the two best ways. Yeah. Thank you so much, Felix, for creating this space. You have such a field around you of presence, and I know that this work is so important to you, that this is what you live, and you would do it no matter what, whether people saw it, didn't see it, were showing up as clients or not showing up. Like, this is you, this is your soul's work, and it creates such an environment of safety and allowing this conversation to unfold. So I'm so grateful for you, and thank you for everything that you do and for being here and for creating this opportunity for us to speak.
I appreciate your words, Rowan. Thank you. Thank you for coming on here. This was such a beautiful conversation and such an important one as well. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Thank you for being here, for tuning in, and for journeying with us. Hopefully, this episode with Rowan Garlow served you well. I'd greatly appreciate if you leave an honest review or subscribe to my YouTube channel. And with that, Felix checking out. Hopefully seeing you in the next episode. Have a wonderful day.